Finn Garcia's mangy Sphynx cat hovered above a welded shut basement door, its ritual scars catching the hazy afternoon light like old burns. I watched its bare skin, stretched tight over ribs that looked too prominent against the pale, vein blue skin tone of the lighthouse ruin around me. The air hung thick with humidity, distorting the cracked lighthouse glass into watery smears. My crowbar scraped the door's metal seam again. Scrape, 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 producing a sound like nails on glass, but the weld held fast. Not a single mark. Just the acrid sweetness of rotting meat, thick enough to taste on my tongue, mixing with the sulfur smell that clung to everything here. My neck prickled. I touched it. Faint blue veins pulsed beneath my skin, mirroring the fudder squelched of wet meat under my own boots as I shifted position. The heat distortion made the distant railway tracks shimmer, like a mirage. And there it was again, the rhythmic clank clank of a detached coupling, sharp and metallic, yet never closer. It echoed the wrong way, like a broken clock ticking backwards in my skull. I calculated the odds of this being a hallucination from the dehydration, the grief of losing my partner to that failed neural interface prototype last week. Skepticism was my armor, but the cat's stillness, its unnerving focus on the door, felt heavier than the humid air. I stepped back, crowbar lowered, watching the cat. Its eyes, dark and ancient, held no fear, just a quiet, waiting intensity. The sulfur smell intensified, sharp and cloying, like rotten meat left too long in a sun-baked gutter. My neck veins throbbed harder, blue against the pale skin. Squelched underfoot again, the sound of my own damp boot sinking into something unseen. The cat lifted its head, nose twitching. It didn't look at me. It looked through the welded seam. The air above the door seemed to thicken, the heat distortion rippling like heat haze off asphalt. I felt a sudden cold pressure against my chest, not physical, but the weight of being observed. The clank 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 of the coupling stopped. Silence thick and heavy as the sulfur smell. Then the sound of a finnail pulled from wood, a dry, sharp philippi echoed from the seam itself. The welded seam wasn't metal anymore. It was parting like wet paper. Pale moisture seeped from the edges, cold against my burning skin where I'd pressed my palm against the door. The cat didn't move towards the seam. It simply stepped through it. One moment, its bare feet on the dusty concrete floor. The next, it was on the other side, looking back at me with those dark, knowing eyes, as if stepping through a curtain of air. The seam closed behind it, leaving no mark, no gap, just the faint smell of wet concrete and the lingering echo of that T-nail pulled from wood D. The plank clank started again, distant, rhythmic, never getting closer. My neck veins pulsed blue. The sulfur smell, the wet meat sound, the pale moisture, everything was bleeding into the same rhythm. The cat sat perfectly still on the other side, its mangy skin gleaming faintly in the hazy light, watching me. Waiting, the door was sealed again, welded shut. The cat had stepped through the seam. Under the flickering bulb, my reflection was an unfamiliar stranger. Veins pulsed blue beneath skin so pale it seemed translucent, like veins of ice in a frozen river. The cat watched me from its perch on the old projector, ritual scars faintly glowing against its bare skin. Its eyes were ancient windows into something I didn't want to understand. The film reel lay before me, tangled and brittle as dead insects. It was my only evidence, now decaying like everything else here. The cat had stepped through that sealed door. I'd seen it, but the film might hold answers, secrets locked in its loops of time. I picked up the reel with trembling hands, fingers brushing against the cold metal spools. They felt slick under my touch, coated in a viscous blue-tinged liquid. I shuddered, but didn't pull away. This was evidence. It had to be examined. The projector whirred to life as I fed the film through its maw. The bulb inside flickered once more before casting an eerie vein blue glow onto the wall. Static crackled, loud and aggressive like tearing parchment. It mimicked the sound of my own skin stretching taut over bones that felt too prominent. The film began to unspool in slow motion. Each frame was a frozen moment captured forever. Or so I'd thought in time's relentless march forward. But now they jutted backwards, like clock hands spinning counterclockwise. The air grew thick with the smell of burning hair and sulfur, heavier than before. My reflection on the wall moved without me. It mimicked my actions but was delayed, lagging behind like a broken echo. I reached out to touch it. My hand passed through empty space. When had this started? How long had we been trapped in this loop? The cat's eyes followed mine as they tracked back and forth between myself and the moving image on the wall. Its gaze felt heavy, accusatory even. It knew something I didn't, or perhaps couldn't understand. Suddenly there was a fidrip. The film tore apart at its midpoint, blue liquid pooling onto the floor where it ended abruptly. My reflection stuttered, froze mid-movement. Then, slowly, deliberately, it began to change shape. Veins bulged beneath its skin, spreading like cracks in ice until they covered every inch of my distorted image. The cat's scars pulsed brighter as if responding to some unseen signal. Its eyes reflected the vein blue glow cast by the projector, but there was no warmth in that light. Only coldness and a hint of malevolence. I stepped back, away from the reflection that wasn't mine anymore. The room breathed around me, heavy with humidity and something else. Something wrong, the air grew thick again. Cloying like rotting meat left too long in a sun-baked gutter. My neck veins throbbed harder, pulsing blue against my pale skin. The cat watched me silently from its perch on the projector. Its eyes held no fear, only that quiet, waiting intensity I'd come to recognize and dread. The film reel lay ruined at my feet, another piece of evidence destroyed by whatever force was controlling this place. But why? What did it want? As if answering my unspoken question, the quench clank plank started again, the distant train whistle echoing through time itself, never getting closer but always louder in its insistence. The air above me seemed to thicken once more, distorting everything into heat haze ripples, and then I felt it, a cold pressure against my chest, not physical this time, but the weight of being observed. Something moved behind those ancient windows in the cat's eyes. It was looking through me now, past me perhaps, at something or someone else entirely. The vein blue infection had spread beyond control. There was no stopping its inevitable decay anymore. Not even me, not even us. And then came that sound again, the thud of tearing parchment, but this time it wasn't just film being torn apart. It felt like something else was ripping too, something inside my own head. The cat's scars pulsed brighter still as everything began to bleed into one rhythmic echo. The sulfur smell, the wet meat sound underfoot, the distant thrank clank clank of that unseen train whistle. Even my heartbeat seemed to fall in line with its relentless march. Everything was connected now, everything was bleeding together, and there was no escape from this vein blue infection. Not for me, not for us, for anyone. Because whatever force controlled these looping hours wasn't interested in stopping decay. It wanted only one thing, to consume everything within reach until nothing remained but empty corridors and twisted trees, rotting floral patterns on faded wallpaper. Until even time itself was swallowed whole by this cycle of corruption. And so I stood there, trapped between my reflection's frozen gaze and the cat's knowing stare, as another hour passed us by. Another moment lost to the decay. Another step closer towards whatever waited beyond that final seal. The one we all feared opening most, the end. The pocket watch felt cold against my palm, heavier than it should have been. 5 seconds, that's all it offered, a paltry reprieve against whatever was happening here. I pressed the activation button. The room stilled, the cat's ragged breathing ceased, a faint whir, the only sound as the watch's gears engaged. Its scarred passage, usually a ripple of twitching muscle, froze mid-motion. The blue glow emanating from its ritual markings intensified, pulsing in sync with the watch's tick-tit. It wasn't stopping the cat, it was merely pausing it. A morbid curiosity seized me. I leaned closer, the metallic tang of the watch's casing filling my nostrils. The air, thick and stagnant, pressed against my lungs. The cat's eyes, those ancient windows, remained fixed, unblinking. I felt a pressure against my skull, a subtle draining, a hollowness spreading through my limbs. The watch's tick resonated within my bones, mimicking the rhythm of my own failing heartbeat. It wasn't the cat's time it was halting, but something else. My understanding fractured. The pocket watch wasn't halting the draining. It was Sibby shielding me from it. The cat wasn't merely observing. It was Sibby feeding. A cold realization settled in my gut, heavier than any dread I'd previously known. The film reel, the projector, the lighthouse itself, it was all a mechanism, a trap. And I, Finn Garcia, was the bait. The 5 seconds ended. The world lurched back into motion. The cat resumed its breathing, a shallow rasp that seemed to suck the air from the room. I stumbled back, the pocket watch falling from my numb fingers. It landed with a soft, toven clink on the floor, the ticking a mocking reminder of my fleeting control. I looked down. The cat's paws, usually silent, left wet imprints on the worn floorboards. The liquid was the same vein blue as the film, as the scars on the cat's skin. It smelled faintly of ozone and something else, something acrid and unfamiliar. A sickly sweetness clung to the air, coating my tongue with a residue I couldn't place. Then I saw it, my shadow. It wasn't attached to me anymore, it detached from the wall, a distorted mockery of my form, and stepped forward, gliding across the floorboards toward me. It didn't mimic my movements, it anticipated them. It wanted something. A wave of nausea rolled over me, the scent of rotting meat intensifying. I backed away, pressing against the cold stone wall. The shadow paused, its form wavering like heat rising from asphalt. It stretched, elongated. the darkness deepening until it seemed to absorb the light around it. I could feel its gaze, a cold, invasive pressure against my mind. The cat's eyes followed the shadow's movement, a silent acknowledgement of the transaction taking place. Its scars pulsed brighter, a rhythmic throbbing that echoed the ticking of the fallen pocket watch. The air thickened again, heavy with the promise of something unseen, something terrible. I tasted copper on my tongue, a phantom flavor that intensified the rising panic. My reflection in the warped glass of a nearby window shifted. It wasn't the subtle lag I'd noticed before. It was a complete alteration. The skin stretched taut over the bone, the veins beneath bulging and darkening, a roadmap of decay. The eyes, once my own, were now vacant, black pools reflecting nothing but the encroaching darkness. The shadow moved again, gliding closer. I wanted to scream, but my throat was constricted, choked by the oppressive air. My limbs felt heavy, leaden. I tried to focus, to grasp at some semblance of control, but the cat's gaze held me captive, a silent, unwavering condemnation. The shadow reached me. It didn't touch me, but its presence pressed against me, a suffocating weight. I felt a searing coldness spread through my veins, a creeping paralysis that stole my strength. The world began to tilt, the walls blurring, the floor receding. The scent of sulfur became overwhelming, choking. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But instead of pain, I felt nothing. A void, a blankness that swallowed my thoughts, my memories, my very sense of self. The cat's breathing, the shadows advance, the ticking of the watch, they faded, receding into the nothingness. Then, a single, sharp sensation. A pressure on my chest, not physical, but the weight of an absence. A sense of being observed, not by the cat, but by something else. Something vast and indifferent. Something that regarded me as nothing more than a vessel, a conduit. I opened my eyes. The room was the same, yet different. The shadows were deeper, the colors muted. The cat sat on the projector, its scarred passage still faintly glowing. But it wasn't looking at me. It was looking through me, and beyond me, in the space behind the cat, I saw it. A swirling vortex of darkness, a shifting, amorphous shape that defied description. It pulsed with a faint, vein blue light, the same color as the liquid on the floor, the same color as the veins beneath my skin. It breathed. A slow, deliberate inhalation followed by an exhalation that sent a ripple of cold across my face. The cat's eyes, those ancient windows, reflected the vortex. And in that reflection, I saw not malice, but a profound and unsettling emptiness. A void that threatened to consume everything. The blueprint felt brittle beneath my fingertips, the paper thin and strangely pliable. It was a schematic of the lighthouse's lower levels, salvaged from a waterlogged archive I'd found tucked behind a crumbling bookcase. I'd been attempting to chart the intensifying sulfurous scent, a creeping miasma that seemed to pool in the basement. It clung to the air, a metallic tang layered over something organic, something rotten. The cat, a mangy sphere of shadow and scarred fur, pressed against the blueprint, its tail twitching. Its paws, disturbingly wet, left blue-veined impressions on the aged paper, mirroring the intricate lines of the diagram. A peculiar resonance hummed in the air, a vibration I felt more than heard. It synced with the pocket watch, the 3D tick-tick-tick slowing, deepening, until it mirrored the cat's shallow, rasping breath, a peculiar counterpoint to the accelerating decay. 5 seconds. The reprieve. I'd begun to rely on it, a fleeting pocket of stillness in a world that seemed to be accelerating towards some unknown, dreadful conclusion. It was a crutch, a denial, a delay. The blueprint began to shimmer, the ink bleeding outwards, a slow, inexorable bloom of blue. The paper felt less like parchment, more like skin. My skin. A wave of nausea slammed into me, a physical manifestation of the unease that had become my constant companion. The blue ink spread across my palm, cold and slick, seeping into my pores. It felt alive like a parasitic bloom. The cat's scars pulsed brighter, a rhythmic throbbing that resonated with the accelerating beat of my own pulse. A grotesque dance of decay and defiance. My veins, I noticed, were prominent. A roadmap of blue beneath the paper, thin skin of my forearm. They throbbed in time with the cat's pulse, the blueprint's bloom. It wasn't a healthy pulse. It was a strained, frantic rhythm, as if something were struggling to escape. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of something both familiar and utterly alien. The ozone tang was stronger now, layered over the underlying sweetness. A cloying, unsettling sweetness. I tried to shake off the sensation, to dismiss it as fatigue, the cumulative effect of sleepless nights and relentless dread. But the feeling persisted, intensified. The blueprint dissolved further, the lines blurring, the structure of the lighthouse fading into a swirling vortex of blue. I could feel the paper's texture shifting beneath my fingertips, becoming viscous, clinging like wet parchment. The scent intensified, coating my tongue with a residue I couldn't identify. It wasn't sulfur, not entirely. It was something older, something primal, something that tasted of the earth's core, a phantom flavor, a betrayal of my senses. The thoughtful tick-tick-tick of the watch continued its descent, a morbid metronome counting down to an unknown catastrophe. The lighthouse itself seemed to groan, a low, guttural sound that resonated deep within my bones. My reflection in a nearby shard of glass was distorted, elongated, the edges blurring like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. I wasn't seeing myself. I was seeing a caricature, a grotesque parody of my former self. The skin stretched taut over the bone, the eyes sunken and hollow. The veins pulsed with an unnatural luminescence, a network of glowing blue rivers beneath the surface. I wanted to scream, to lash out at the encroaching madness, but my voice caught in my throat, a strangled gasp lost in the oppressive silence. The cat's gaze locked onto mine, a silent, unwavering condemnation. Its eyes, those ancient windows, reflected not just my distorted image, but something else, something vast and indifferent, something that regarded me with a detached clinical curiosity. The blueprint had completely dissolved, the blue ink now coating my entire hand, spreading up my arm, staining my clothes. It felt cold, slick, like a layer of viscous slime. I looked down at my hand and saw not my own flesh, but a shimmering, translucent membrane. Beneath it, the blue veins pulsed with an unnatural intensity. A sudden, sharp, fulling sensation seized my chest, as if something were being extracted from within. Not a physical pain, but a profound sense of loss. A hollowness that resonated deep within my soul. The air grew heavier, the scent of decay intensifying. I felt a presence vast and ancient pressing down upon me. A silent observer. A predator. The lighthouse groaned again, a deep, resonant tremor that shook the very foundations of the structure. The cat's scars pulsed with a blinding intensity, casting an eerie blue light across the room. The tick-tick-tick of the watch slowed to a near standstill, the silence amplifying the oppressive weight of the atmosphere. And then, stillness. A profound, unsettling stillness. The blue light receded. The scent of decay diminished. The blueprint was gone, absorbed into my flesh, leaving behind only the slick, cold residue on my skin. I looked down at my hand, expecting to see a monstrous transformation, a grotesque mutation. But there was nothing. Just the lingering coldness, the phantom taste of decay. The lighthouse remained silent. The cat watched, and the countdown continued. The wax felt brittle, cracking under my fingernails as I forced it deep into my ears. A futile gesture, I knew the clank-clank persisted, a relentless hammering against the inside of my skull. It wasn't the sound of the coupling itself, but the resonance, the echoing amplification within the lighthouse's decaying core. It was a mechanical heartbeat, a perverse rhythm to this slow unraveling. The crunch of sun-bleached bone underfoot was almost comforting in its mundanity, a grounding sensation in a world that felt increasingly unreal. Each step sent a shiver through the dust-coated floorboards, a brittle protest against my intrusion. The cat moved then, a fluid, silent shift of shadow. It pressed against my leg, a mangy sphere of scarred fur and unsettling stillness. The ritual scars, a constellation of blue-veined markings across its shaved skin, pulsed faintly in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. A fleeting memory surfaced, a scholar's note mentioning the practice of marking Sphynx cats with sigils to ward off. Something, I dismissed it, of course. I always did. Sentimentality was a luxury I could no longer afford. Then, the cat sunk in, its claws into my ear, a sharp, precise pressure that bypassed the wax and plunged directly into the bone. A jolt of pain, swift and intense, followed by a wave of nausea. The smell intensified then, a sickening sweetness layered over the familiar tang of sulfur and something older, something that tasted like the earth's core, a phantom flavor that clung to the back of my tongue. The clank-clank seemed to originate from within my very bones, a parasitic echo resonating with my own heartbeat. My reflection in a piece of shattered mirror that lay discarded on the floor was a grotesque caricature. The smile wasn't mine. It stretched too wide. The corners of my mouth pulled back to reveal teeth that seemed sharper. The eyes were wrong too, empty, devoid of the weary skepticism that had defined me for so long. They held something else now, something vast and indifferent. The cat's breathing synced with the mechanical rhythm, a rasping, guttural sound that mirrored the Finn clank-clank-clank. Each inhale was a slow, deliberate expansion of its chest, each exhale a silent expulsion of something unseen. I tried to pull away to shake off the sensation of being observed, dissected, but the cat's grip was surprisingly strong, its claws digging deeper into my flesh. A memory flickered, my daughter Alara laughing, her face lit by the flickering light of a projector. A film reel, a memory I had deliberately suppressed, buried beneath layers of clinical detachment. But the lighthouse, it seemed, had a way of dredging up the past, of twisting it, distorting it, until it became something monstrous. The clank intensified, a physical pressure against my temples. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the sound to cease. It was a futile exercise. The lighthouse was not a structure of stone and mortar, but a resonating chamber, a conduit for something else, something that fed on sound, on memory, on despair. I opened my eyes. The cat's scars pulsed brighter, a rhythmic throbbing that mirrored the frantic beat of my pulse. My veins, I noticed, were prominent beneath my skin, a roadmap of blue against the pallor of my flesh. They throbbed in time with a mechanical rhythm, a grotesque dance of decay and defiance. The smell of rotting meat was overwhelming now, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. The reflection smiled again, a wider, more unsettling grin. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but of recognition, of kinship. I felt a coldness seep into my bones, a profound sense of loss that had nothing to do with Alara, nothing to do with the life I had once known. It was the loss of something fundamental, something essential to my being. I stumbled backward, knocking over a pile of rusted gears. The Finn clank seemed to mock me, a triumphant chorus to my descent. The cat released my ear, but remained close, a silent sentinel guarding my unraveling. The blue-veined wound throbbed, a constant reminder of the intrusion. It felt wrong, profoundly, undeniably wrong. A violation of something sacred. The lighthouse groaned, a deep, resonant tremor that shook the very foundations of the structure. The 40 clank reached a fever pitch, a deafening crescendo that threatened to shatter my sanity. I covered my ears, but the sound permeated everything, vibrating through my bones, resonating within my soul. I wanted to scream, but the sound was trapped within me, a strangled gasp lost in the mechanical cacophony. Then, abruptly, silence. The fine clank ceased. The throbbing in my head subsided. The smell of rotting meat diminished. Though the phantom taste lingered on my tongue, the cat remained, its eyes fixed on mine, a silent, unwavering condemnation. The smile in the mirror was gone, replaced by a reflection that was different, empty, hollow. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the core that the silence was not a reprieve. It was a prelude, a holding of breath before the plunge. The pocket watch felt cold against my palm, the brass radiating a chill that seeped into my bones. I pressed it against my wrist, matching its measured tick to the frantic hammering in my chest. My pulse. It was sinking. Not with my own rhythm, but with the fun thump resonating from the walls, the mechanical heartbeat of the lighthouse itself. Each click of the watch mirrored the clank, a perverse synchronization of man and machine. The air tasted of iron, a phantom tang on my tongue that intensified with each synchronized beat. The walls weren't solid, I realized. They thumped twee, a fleshy resonance that vibrated through my very being. The sound wasn't emanating from a source, but twee the source. The lighthouse itself was breathing. A slow, deliberate inhale and exhale that shifted the dust motes, dancing in the shafts of pale light. A wave of nausea rolled over me, a sickening lurch in my stomach that threatened to spill the metallic taste from my mouth. My skin felt too tight, too sensitive. I lifted a hand, examining it under the dim light. The pallor was unsettling, the blue veins tracing a roadmap beneath the surface. They pulsed in time with the thump, a grotesque choreography of decay. A creeping sensation began at my fingertips, a prickling heat that spread rapidly across my skin. It felt like something was trying to push its way out. Then, it happened. A sliver of skin peeled away from my forearm, a wet, papery separation. Beneath it, the veins pulsed, a vibrant network of blue against the raw, pink flesh. The smell intensified then, the sickly sweetness layered over the sulfur, and the older earth core flavor. Now, a suffocating weight in my lungs. It was the smell of something ripening, something unnatural. More skin peeled. A slow, agonizing process that left me trembling. The cat watched, its scarred face impassive, its eyes gleaming in the gloom. The blue markings on its fur pulsed brighter, a rhythmic throbbing that mirrored the frantic beat of my pulse. They weren't just scars, I realized. They were conduits, channels for something that was flowing into me out of the lighthouse, out of the very walls. The light seemed to be drawn to them, absorbed into the intricate network of blue veins, leaving the surrounding fur a deeper, more unsettling black. A rasping hiss escaped the cat's throat, a sound that wasn't a vocalization, but a release of pressure. The pocket watch slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the dust-coated floor. The synchronized beat faltered, then stopped. The thump-thump-thoo in the walls intensified, mocking my loss of control, my vision blurred, the edges of the room seeming to warp and distort. The smell of rotting meat was overwhelming now, a blanket of decay that pressed down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. It wasn't just a smell, it was a presence, a weight on my chest. I stumbled backward, knocking over another pile of rusted gears. The metallic clang was swallowed by the fundament thump, the minor discord in a symphony of decay. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to fight against the encroaching transformation. But my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. My thoughts were sluggish, clouded by a fog of dread. The lighthouse was not just a structure, it was a crucible forging something new, something other. More skin peeled away, revealing more of the pulsing blue veins. They branched and spread, like roots seeking purchase in fertile ground. The cat moved closer, its breath warm against my leg, a silent reassurance in the face of my unraveling. The scent of decay intensified, a tangible pressure that threatened to crush me. It was a smell of finality, of something ending, of something beginning. My memories, once sharp and clear, began to fray at the edges. Elara's laughter, the warmth of her hand in mine, the scent of her hair. They were fading, dissolving into the oppressive darkness. The lighthouse was feeding on them, consuming them, leaving behind only a hollow shell, a vessel for something else. The thump-thump-thump resonated within my very bones now, a parasitic rhythm that drowned out my own heartbeat. It was no longer a sound, but a sensation, a vibration that threatened to shatter my sanity. My reflection in a shard of mirror showed a stranger. The eyes were wrong, vacant, devoid of recognition. They held a cold, indifferent knowing that wasn't mine. A smile stretched across my lips, a grotesque parody of joy. The skin continued to peel, revealing more of the blue veins. It felt like shedding an old coat, discarding a life I no longer recognized. The cat's breathing synced with the toothy thump-thump-thump, a rasping, guttural sound that mirrored the mechanical rhythm. Each inhale was a slow, deliberate expansion of its chest, each exhale a silent expulsion of something unseen. The transformation was complete. The pocket watch slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the dust-coated floor. The sharp, thudding tink was swallowed by the pervasive thump. Thumpied a discordant note in a symphony of decay. The synchronized beat faltered, then ceased. The walls pulsed, the fleshy resonance intensifying, mocking my loss of control. A wave of disorientation washed over me, the edges of the room seeming to soften, to fond breathe. The cat watched, its scarred face an impassive mask. It moved with a sinuous grace, a ripple of black fur against the gloom, and began to fortilick, not with a frantic rasp of a normal feline, but with a slow, deliberate absorption, the shards of the shattered watch disappearing into its mangy coat. The brass fragments seemed to have melted into its fur, the blue markings on its hide pulsing brighter with each absorbed piece, a rhythmic throbbing that echoed the fading thump-thump-thumpy in the walls. It was a process of ingestion, a slow consumption of time itself. A new sound emerged, replacing the silence left by the broken watch. A fissess tiskered, like a nail being drawn slowly from wood. It wasn't loud, but it resonated within my skull, a physical sensation more than an auditory event. A tremor ran through the floor, a subtle vibration that seemed to originate from the very bedrock of the lighthouse. The smell intensified, the metallic tang of blood now laced with something. Older, something like the scent of damp earth and the faint, almost pleasant aroma of overripe fruit. My shadow detached. It wasn't a sudden separation, but a gradual peeling away, a slow disengagement from my form. It wavered at first, a distorted mimicry of my posture, then solidified, taking on a life of its own. It moved with a purpose I didn't possess, gliding across the dust-covered floor towards the basement stairs. Each step was silent, deliberate, a phantom procession leading me towards an unknown destination. I tried to call out, to scream, but my voice caught in my throat, a strangled gasp lost in the oppressive silence. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet as I stumbled forward, drawn by an unseen force. The pocket watch fragments had vanished, leaving only a faint, oily residue on the floor. It shimmered in the dim light, reflecting the pulsing blue veins that now crisscrossed my skin. They were spreading, tendrils of an alien network claiming me as their own. The skin peeled again, a slow, agonizing release, revealing more of the pulsing blue beneath. The cat's breath grew heavier, a rasping exhale that carried the scent of sulfur and something else. Something ancient. The basement stairs were a descent into darkness, the air growing colder with each step. The tisket of the nail pulling from wood grew louder, more insistent, guiding my shadow's path. The walls of the basement were slick with moisture, the stone cold and clammy against my fingertips. The smell was almost unbearable now, a suffocating weight that pressed down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. It was a smell of finality, of something ending, of something beginning. The shadow reached the bottom of the stairs, disappearing into the impenetrable blackness. It didn't pause, didn't hesitate. It simply vanished, swallowed by the darkness, a phantom beckoning me forward. The fithutha thump-thump-thu in the walls faded slightly, replaced by a low guttural hum that resonated within my bones. A hum that felt familiar. I followed, drawn by an irresistible compulsion. Each step was a surrender, a relinquishing of control. The floor beneath my feet felt unstable, as if the very foundations of the lighthouse were shifting, rearranging themselves to accommodate something new. The blue markings on my skin pulsed brighter, a rhythmic throbbing that mirrored the humming in my bones. The cat watched from the top of the stairs, its eyes gleaming in the gloom, a silent sentinel guarding the gateway to oblivion. The basement opened into a vast chamber, a cavern of shadows and echoing silence. In the center of the chamber stood a single object, a film reel, encased in a rusted metal canister. It spun slowly, silently, projecting fragmented images onto the walls. Images that weren't memories, but possibilities. Images of a life I never lived, a future I could never have. The shadow stood before the reel, its form shimmering in the flickering light. It reached out, its hand passing through the canister as if it were a mere illusion. The tiska reached its crescendo, a final agonizing groan of wood and metal. Complete and utter silence. The fo-thump-tea ceased. The blue markings on my skin glowed with an unnatural intensity, illuminating the cavern with an eerie, ethereal light. My reflection in a shard of mirror showed a stranger. The eyes were wrong, vacant, devoid of recognition. A smile stretched across my lips, a grotesque parody of joy. The shadow turned, its form merging with my own. The pen felt brittle in my hand, the graphite scraping against the damp paper. Kim 13 fails in 40 minutes. Asterisk, a precise assessment, devoid of emotion. A calculation. It wasn't a prediction, not anymore. More like an acknowledgement of inevitable geometry, of angles collapsing. The ink bled slightly, the paper absorbing it like a thirsty wound. I barely registered the chill that settled on the back of my neck, a coolness that had less to do with temperature and more with displacement. Then the cat stepped into the text. Not Tyvera. It, not near it. Into it. One moment, the mangy Sphynx was perched on the edge of the table, a skeletal silhouette against the weak light. The next, its paw pressed down on the sentence, the letters dissolving around it, the paper itself seeming to unravel at the edges. It wasn't a physical intrusion, not exactly. More like the paper had yielded, accepted the cat as part of its own structure. The letters didn't smear, they simply ceased to be. Erased not by ink, but by absence. A sigh. Not a human exhalation, but the protracted, mournful release of pressure from a failing valve. It wasn't audible, not in the conventional sense. It resonated in my teeth, a vibration in the bone, accompanied by the distinct sensation of air fin moving in the wrong direction. A door closing, but not to seal a room, to seal a possibility. To lock something to intivauti that had already slipped inside. The lighthouse didn't offer a door, but the feeling was the same. A shutting down. The cat finished its work, its head lowering, its scarred face a study in indifference. It moved with a liquid grace, a ripple of black fur against the gloom, and then it began to drink. Not water, not milk. My shadow. It wasn't a violent act, not a snatching or a tearing. The shadow simply detached. It peeled away from my feet, rising like a dark tide, coalescing into the cat. Let's open more. The cat did chew, did swallow. It tworbed des. The darkness flowed into it, a blackness that didn't diminish the ambient light, but seemed to consume me, it leaving a hollow space where my shadow once lay. I stood there, momentarily weightless, as if a vital part of my being had been excised. A hollow man, a shell. The lighthouse beam, usually a methodical sweep of the horizon, faltered. It stuttered, then locked into a single unwavering point. Not rotating, not searching. Just illuminating nothing. A blue pulse, a sickly bruised hue that painted the stone walls in an unearthly glow. The blue markings on my skin responded, the veins beneath the surface throbbing with a matching rhythm, a network of light spreading, claiming me. Another sound, a precise and terrible intrusion. The rasp of metal against wood, but not a scraping, a driving. A nail being forced deliberately into something solid. Each strike resonated within my skull, a physical pressure building behind my eyes. It wasn't tea coming from outside, from the lighthouse structure. It was Sundingsidone. My head, the cat's breath, a rasping exhale, carried the scent of something ancient, something buried. Not decay, not quite. More like the scent of potential, of growth, of something blooming in the darkness, the film reel. It was always the film reel. I could feel the edges of myself fraying, the seams of my consciousness unraveling. A new sensation, the taste of ash. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, each step a surrender. The oily residue where the pocket watch had shattered pulsed with the same blue light as my veins, as the unmoving lighthouse beam. It wasn't tea, a reflection. Not anymore. It was a contagion. I could feel the cat's gaze on my back, a weightless pressure, a silent claim. It was waiting. Not for me to fall, but for me to complete the transition. The foot-driving sound intensified, a rhythmic hammering that echoed the pulse in my veins. It wasn't a sound to be heard, but to be swiftly felt, a pressure against the skull, a fracturing of the mind. My reflection in the dust, coated glass of a broken mirror, showed a stranger, a face that was almost but not quite my own. The eyes were vacant, hollow. A slow, deliberate smile stretched across my lips, a grotesque parody of joy. The cat turned its head, its gaze locking with mine. The shadow, now fully absorbed, shimmered within its fur, a darkness contained. It stepped towards me, its form merging with my own. The blue light swelled, consuming me. The beam didn't sweep anymore. It pulsed now, a sickly blue that seemed to throb in time with the veins beneath my skin. I stared at it, unblinking, as if waiting for some unseen signal. The lighthouse had been silent since P13 failed. A sudden gasp echoed through the room, sharp and metallic like a nail being driven into wood. It resonated within me, more felt than heard, vibrating against my bones. No wind stirred outside to explain it. This sound was born here, inside these stone walls. My breath hitched in response, my chest tightening around an unseen pressure. The cat moved then, its mangy form slipping through the beam as if it wasn't there at all. No mark remained on the dust. Coated floor where it passed, no disruption of light or shadow. It was like watching a ghost walk across solid ground. My gaze followed it, tracking its silent progress until it disappeared into the gloom by the door leading down to the basement. The scent of sulfur faded, replaced by something acrid and sweet, like rotting meat left too long in the sun. It clung to my nostrils, coating them with an unpleasant film that made me want to gag or sneeze, but did neither. Instead, I felt a creeping dread settle into the pit of my stomach. The lighthouse ignited then, not with flame but light. Blue veins pulsed along its walls like arteries carrying stolen life, starting from the basement door and spreading upwards until every stone glowed coldly blue. It was as if the very structure had come alive, or worse, awakened something within it that shouldn't to have been disturbed. My reflection in the dust, coated glass of a broken mirror, showed me standing there, pale skin glowing with an unnatural light, eyes wide and vacant like those of a doll left out too long. The cat's gaze met mine from across the room, its violet eyes burning through the darkness. It seemed to beckon me, inviting me down into that basement door where something waited behind closed doors. The gasp echoed again, louder this time, driving another nail home within my skull. I felt a sudden urge to run, but my feet remained rooted to the spot, held captive by some unseen force. The beam pulsed faster now, its rhythm matching mine, our hearts beating together in syncopated terror. There was no going back from here. All paths led downwards into that blue, veined darkness. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against whatever horrors lay ahead. As I stepped forward towards the basement door, the cat's gaze followed me, its silent claim echoing through every step like the distant train whistle that never seemed to get any closer but always remained just out of reach. My palms pressed flat against the cold, welded seam of the door, the metal biting through my skin like 1,000 needles. The cat's mangy form slipped through the gap ahead of me, its violet eyes fixed on mine, the ritual scars on its skin pulsing faintly blue. I felt the weld seal itself, a sharp, wet tooth, like a fist driving a nail into wet wood, echoing up my arms. My breath hitched, not from fear, but from the unnatural cold seeping through my skin. I'd pressed harder, forcing the seam wider just to let the cat pass. Now the seam was closing, sealing me inside the lighthouse's cold, blue-veined heart. The basement door was the source. The light didn't quite come from the door, it was the door. Blue veins pulsed beneath my fingers, spreading like frozen arterial flow. I watched my skin turn. The pale, human skin I'd known for 37 years vanished, replaced by a translucent blue, as if the lighthouse's very blood had seeped into my pores. I could see the faint, thready blue veins beneath, mapping my own anatomy in cold, unfamiliar light. The cat's gaze never wavered. It didn't move. It simply tweaked to a dark anchor in the spreading blue. The scent of rotting meat from the previous chapter faded, replaced by something sharper, cleaner, the smell of ozone after a lightning strike, laced with a metallic tang of frozen blood. It coated my tongue, thick and cloying. The cat's gaze intensified, pulling at something deep inside me, a silent demand. I felt my own pulse match the lighthouse's rhythm, a cold, mechanical thrumming through the stone. I pushed harder against the door, not to open it, but to feel the pulse of the light within it. The blue veins on the stone walls flared brighter, casting long, sharp shadows that didn't waver. The cat didn't move, didn't blink, its violet eyes burning with an ancient, knowing light. The lighthouse wasn't just illuminated, it was sooty alive with that cold, blue light flowing from the basement door like a frozen river. The entire structure pulsed stone by stone, with a cold, blue-veined pulse. My skin, now entirely translucent, reflected the light back, glowing with the same unnatural hue. The cat's scars pulsed brighter, a silent confirmation. The lighthouse ignited from the basement door.